I am super excited to. Oh my God, what just happened? Howdy, welcome to One for the Books. I'm Sandra Broadwell. I'm super excited for this vlog. I absolutely love October. It is my favorite month of the year. If you watched my September reading wrap-up / book haul, you know I already picked up 2 books to read during this vlog, and I've decided that I am going to attempt to do a couple of themed activities to go with the 2 books that I've chosen. The first one is The Once and Future Witches by Alix Harrow, and I have already started reading this. I'm about 60 something pages in, and it is super intriguing to me so far. I'm really loving it. It is about the 3 Eastwood sisters. The book is set in 1893, and they had a mother that passed away when they were very young and a father who it sounds like was pretty abusive and terrible. And so one by one, the sisters run away from home to escape their father, but in doing so, they have to abandon their other sisters. And so at the beginning of this book, they get back together for the first time in like 7 years, and there's a lot of hard feelings and a lot of trauma to go through. But it's also a time of the women's suffragist movement, and they've lived lives of having absolutely no power or respect, and it's kind of time for them to decide how they want the rest of their lives to go and whether they want to acquire power through the women's right to vote or through witchcraft. And so it seems like that's kind of the direction that it's going so far. I'm really digging it. I love the women's suffragist movement. I love witches. The writing is super beautiful. Alix Harrow uses a lot of metaphors and just like very beautiful phrases to describe things. You know, I read like 2 pages of this and I was like, oh, I'm gonna like this book a lot. And just a super intriguing story so far, and I'm excited to see where it goes. It's a little over 500 pages, I think. Yeah, it's right around the 500 page mark, just a little bit over. So because The Once and Future Witches is about a trio of sisters, I am going to watch Hocus Pocus 2, which is also about a trio of witch sisters. Of course, that is the Sanderson sisters instead of the Eastwood sisters, but I'll give you guys a little review of Hocus Pocus 2 after I watch that. So I'm excited for that, and I don't know what my other activity is going to be yet, but I'm going to try and find at least 2 activities related to the books that I'm reading. So I've got one figured out for that book so far. The second book that I am going to read for this vlog is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and I'm super excited specifically to read this version of the book because it has all of these illustrations by Bernie Wrightson, who is a very famous comic book and graphic artist illustrator who's worked on a lot of really cool comic books like Swamp Thing and Spider-Man and, you know, lots of classics. So it has quite a few illustrations in here. It also has a little bit of a history of who Mary Shelley was and an introduction by Stephen King. So that's going to be really great to read. I have not figured out what my activities for Frankenstein are going to be yet, so I'm a little nervous about that. I could just watch the Frankenstein movie. I've never seen the original Frankenstein movie, but I don't want to limit myself to just Frankenstein because I feel like that could be a little too limiting and I might not be able to find enough activities. So I'm going to broaden it to monsters in general. So I'm going to try and do 1 more witch themed thing for The Once and Future Witches and 2 monster themed things for Frankenstein. So I don't know what those are going to be yet. I'm a little nervous about it, but I think it's going to be fun to try and find those things. So come with me and we'll figure it out together. Hey, I'm about a third of the way through The Once and Future Witches, and I am really enjoying it so far, so I just wanted to give you guys a little update on my thoughts. I love that this book is not shying away from the fact that the women's suffragist movement was very exclusionary. Even though suffragists were fighting for the rights of all women, they did not want all women standing beside them in that fight. And they were very particular about the image that they portrayed because they thought if They allowed colored women or women who weren't dressed well and those sorts of things to be the face of the movement, that men would be less likely to support them. And maybe that's true, but yeah, it's a really unfortunate history and is echoed through most feminist movements that have occurred throughout history, have been very exclusionary. So the Eastwood sisters kind of start their own movement to bring witchcraft back into the world, and they're much more inclusive. They recognize that there are other types of witchcraft that are practiced by African cultures and Native American cultures, and that we're all stronger if we pool our resources and, all for one, one for all, that sort of thing. But they have some of these women attend their meetings. There's one particular scene that I really liked where there was a Sioux woman, a Native American, and she told them, "Not all magic is for you." And I thought that was a really powerful moment and had some really great subtext. I'm just really glad those conversations are happening in this book. I really appreciate the narrative choices and where that's going. I also really love the distinct personalities that all three of the Eastwood sisters have, and they're kind of separate storylines. One of the Eastwood sisters has some sort of like sapphic longing going on, which I think could potentially turn into a romance. So that's fun so far. And one of the sisters has this kind of internal struggle about whether or not she can really trust her sisters because they haven't seen each other, in 7 years. They don't really know each other anymore. And there's still just all this misunderstanding and poor communication about their shared past trauma and how it was different for all of them. And so she's kind of struggling between what family means and whether she should prioritize her relationships with her sisters or kind of this new family that she has. And then the third sister is a lot more untethered to cultural norms for women, and she's a lot younger and hasn't faced all of the hardships out in the world that they have. She's a lot more willing to use violent means to reach the ends that they want, and their goals, are of course to have power and respect and have a place in the world. But she isn't trying to shy away from the fact that they might need to, take some unsavory steps to get there. And I think her other two sisters are really struggling with that and whether or not they can trust her to make decisions on behalf of their group. There's a lot happening and it's all really great so far. There is one thing that I have to pick apart in this book, and it's so minor, it's really not a big deal, but this book is set in 1893, and there is a scene where they go to a fair and ride a Ferris wheel. I have a weird random knowledge of the history of the World's Fair, and I looked this up to confirm, and the first ever Ferris wheel was invented in 1893. It debuted at the Chicago World's Fair, and it was a big fucking deal. And people lost their minds over this, and it was the craziest engineering feat people had ever seen. You can imagine, I'm sure, if you had never seen anything like a Ferris wheel. And the first one that was actually built held hundreds and hundreds of people. Each cart would hold 60 people, and it would take over an hour for a single revolution. And so the fact that they just casually mention riding the Ferris wheel at this fair that they go to, and it's not made into a big deal at all, and it's just the sister and one of her friends that ride it, and it's very much you can tell the author was envisioning a Ferris wheel you imagine a Ferris wheel when you go to a fair today, and that's not accurate whatsoever. So I do have to throw that out there just because it totally threw me out of the story as soon as they said it, and I was like, that's not right. But I don't hold that against the story at all, and it is just a super minor scene. I just happen to have random historical knowledge of Ferris wheels for some reason, and I knew that wasn't right. But yeah, otherwise, really enjoying it and can't wait to read more.
A significant light, just where it was needed, gleaming black as night, cloistered in injustice, dead in the eye of time. Nobody is losing. Faces merchant.
Howdy. I have finished the Once and Future Witches and I absolutely loved it. I am giving this a 4.5 stars. Really, the only reason it doesn't get 5 stars is because of the pacing. I feel like Alix Harrow just didn't capitalize on the momentum of the story very well, and that even during some of the really tense moments, I could put the book down and walk away from it pretty easily, which was a missed opportunity, I think. But that's really my only complaint with the book. Even though it's a pretty thick read, I didn't feel like any of the story was unnecessary fluff. I loved all the aspects of it. I thought the characters were extremely well written and flawed, and in a lot of ways I felt more connected to these characters than to characters in any of the books that I've read recently. So absolutely highly recommend this. It was a great seasonal read. Last night I picked up Frankenstein, and I basically just read all the introductory material in the book. So there was an introduction by Stephen King, which was really weird. I did not think he did a good introduction to this book, which okay. And then there was some historical context provided for the time period in which this book was published, which was 1818 originally. And that's a really crazy time in history. Then it has a little bit of a history of Mary Shelley's life. She had a really interesting and somewhat tragic life. Her mother died giving birth to her. She got married really young and had 4 children, and I think 3 of them died really young, which was probably typical for this time period. And then her husband also died when she was 24 years old in a shipwreck. So that's a very 1800s way to die, it sounds like. This is apparently the revised version of the Frankenstein story. Like I said, the original was published in 1818. This is the 1831 edition, which Mary Shelley republished. If I turn out to really like this book, then I would be interested at some point to go back and read the 1818 version just to see kind of what the differences are. But because this is the revised version, it has an introduction by Mary Shelley herself as well. I'm excited to actually start the story now that I've finished all the extra material in the book. I'm planning to watch Hocus Pocus 2 probably tonight, but at least sometime this week, and I'm excited to continue on with my challenge of finding 2 related activities to go with each of these books. So I will let you guys know how it goes. Sure. Hey y'all, I'm stupid excited because I just found my second witch activity for this vlog. I found an article in my local newspaper that said Harry Potter themed coffee shop. I did not know this place existed. Apparently it's been open for 6 months already. But anyway, it's called the Creature's Cauldron Cafe here in Lexington. So I'm gonna go get myself a witchy brew this morning, and I'm super stoked about it. So I'll see y'all there. Hey y'all, I just got back from the Creature's Cauldron Cafe in downtown Lexington. I do want to say this is not an officially Harry Potter licensed store. This is just a cute local business that had a fun theme with some like Gryffindor colors and some kind of witchy elixir-y themed drinks. And so I was not supporting the actual Harry Potter franchise by going to support this local business. It was so fun. The people there were very nice, and I had a butter brew, which was it was everything that I always wanted a butterbeer to be when I was growing up reading those books. I'm super glad that I completed my second task of the witch-themed category by going to the Creature's Cauldron Cafe. That was delightful. Highly recommend if you're ever in Lexington. I realized I never gave you guys an update for when I watched Hocus Pocus 2 and my thoughts on that movie. I am a huge fan of the original Hocus Pocus, of course, because I'm a millennial. I grew up watching that movie like every year, and I still continue to watch it most years to this day. So I was a little nervous when I heard they were making a second one, but I thought they did a really good job. They had a bunch of callbacks to the first movie, but they did it in a way that wasn't super kitschy. It was very cute, and it just like, it had a lot of fun with itself, and it did some things better than the original movie did, especially with like the weird emphasis on virginity in that movie. Had some good overall themes, and it was just cute and fun, and I thought that was a great tie-in with the three witches of the Sanderson sisters, the three witches of the Eastwood sisters, and the Once and Future witches. And even though the stories are absolutely nothing alike, it was a great activity for this vlog.
The trees will bloom and ice will melt. We'll always remember how it felt.
Hey, so I just finished Frankenstein yesterday, and I really liked it, but it was absolutely nothing like what I expected. And I went into it knowing it was going to be nothing like what I expected, so the fact that it still hit that mark is a little interesting. I liked all the different aspects of the story, but at the same time, it didn't have everything that I wanted out of it. I wanted a little more moral qualms and dilemmas about playing God and what it means to be human. And even though the what it means to be human thing was kind of implied, the playing God wasn't. And I've heard that that is more of a factor in the 1818 edition, but it wasn't present at all in the 1831 version. I also expected like grave robbing and like acquiring the body parts needed to create Frankenstein was going to be a bigger thing, and it was not mentioned at all, which I thought was interesting. I know bodies were a lot easier to come by in the late 1700s, but just thought that was going to be a significant part of the story. But the monster that Victor Frankenstein creates, it's pretty early on in the book. The rest of the book is really about the repercussions of what it means to have created life for the creature and for the creator. And Victor Frankenstein definitely has like a woe is me a kind of attitude about it. He feels like his life is ruined because he did this terrible thing, when in fact it's like everyone else's life around him that's ruined. I did like that there were some chapters that you got to hear from the monster's perspective. The monster is absolutely nothing like what you imagine when you imagine like the old Hollywood movies. Besides being described as very large and very ugly, he was described as basically being like superhuman strength, superhuman speed, extremely agile, extremely intelligent. Overall, I really enjoyed it. It was relied a little too heavily on beautiful descriptions of scenery and travel, and I could have used a little less of that and a little more moral quandaries. But overall, I really enjoyed it, and I'm really glad I read it. So I also wanted to mention that Bernie Wrightston's illustrations in this book, they were magnificent. I absolutely felt like they enhanced my reading experience, and so for anyone who is wanting to read Frankenstein, I specifically recommend this edition of the book because it was a super excellent way to enjoy the story with those beautiful pictures throughout. That was Frankenstein. I also completed my first Frankenstein-themed activity, which I created a D&D one-shot for my family. It was Frankenstein themed. I made the big bad of the D&D session as Dr. Elizabeth Lavenza, which in the book, Elizabeth Lavenza is Victor Frankenstein's sister / cousin / wife. It's very weird, but I just used that name in the D&D campaign so that my family wouldn't know immediately that it was going to be Frankenstein themed, since they wouldn't know who Elizabeth Lavenza was. And then she was basically an arch necromancer in my D&D one-shot and had created a bunch of flesh golems for them to fight, and it was almost a TPK. Of my 5 family members that played, 4 of them died and 1 of them ended up running away, so it was pretty intense, but because it was just a Halloween themed one-shot, everyone had a lot of fun with it, and yeah, I'm so glad that I decided to go that direction. Hey, so I just finished watching the original Frankenstein movie, which came out in 1931, which is kind of cool because it's like 100 years after the edition of Frankenstein that I read. You know, the old black and white, like Boris Karloff movie. Anyway, it was terrible. It had literally no redeeming qualities. I am just astounded that this was the classic that people know. It has like, I guess the one redeeming quality was that he had a very cool laboratory, and it has like the classic scene where the body's like laying on the thing and it's getting lifted up into the ceiling and the lightning and all that kind of stuff. It was absolutely nothing like the book. It was just cringy and poorly edited, and oh man, like I like old movies sometimes. I enjoy like old black and white sci-fi films, but I don't know what they were thinking with this one. So it's really funny that it's like still such a popular cultural thing. I am super glad that I watched this just because like it is the thing. But the book was completely different, completely better in every way. I would love to see a truer adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I would love to see, and it wouldn't have to be like 100% exactly like what Mary Shelley wrote, but just like a good faith adaptation of her original intent behind the story, I think would be super interesting. And I don't know that that's ever actually been done, which is a little surprising, or at least if it has, I'm not aware of it. But I guess that was my second Frankenstein themed activity. So I have now read 2 amazing books. I did 2 themed activities for each one, and I successfully completed my Halloween spooky vlog for the month. So I'm super proud of myself. I had a ton of fun doing this. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for watching. Please like this video if you'd like to see more vlog challenges. If you're not subscribed already, please subscribe for more bookish content in the future.